Sup y'all, and welcome to Regional and Interregional Interactions, Unit 3A, from circa 600 CE to circa 1450. In Unit 3A, we're going to focus on trade, the Islamic world, and the world of Christendom. So let's begin with Part 1, which I like to call Trading Places. We'll begin looking at the post-classical era, also known as the time of the Third Wave civilizations, starting around 600 CE, which is a midpoint when many of the classical civilizations were either declining or collapsing, but also a time close to when Islam began to spread. Some major concepts in the post-classical era focus on increased trade between civilizations, greater conflict between regional powers, and the expanded cultural diffusion of technological innovations and religions. In this video, we're going to primarily focus on this essential question. How did commerce expand and culture diffuse during the post-classical era? Trade is highly influenced by environmental variation. Since no two places are exactly alike, different environments produce different raw materials and offer different resources. So a resource that is plentiful or in surplus in one region would have less value than a place where it is scarce, or more so if it is non-existent. Across Eurasia spanned one of the most recognized trade routes in history, the Silk Road, which was a network of interlinking trade routes and cities extending around 4,000 miles and connecting vast regions such as China, India, the Middle East, and Europe. Now, obviously silk was brought into Europe, but also spices, dyes, jewels, and many other valuable goods were traded as well. The route was lengthy, dangerous, and expensive. Some goods were around 100 times the cost in Europe from their origins in the East Asia region. The Silk Road also formed because of geography. Outer Eurasia consisted of relatively warm and arable lands that gave rise to most of the great empires during the time of the first and second wave civilizations. By contrast, Inner Eurasia consisted of drier climate with more rugged terrain in which pastoral people herded their animals and occasionally raided their agricultural neighbors. Over many centuries, various technological innovations made the use of camels, horses, and oxen a more effective means of agricultural production and transportation. Yokes are wooden crosspieces that are fastened over the necks of two animals and attached to a plow or cart, and they had been around since around 4000 BCE. These worked well for oxen, but were limited for horses, since they cross over the animal's windpipe, making it difficult for them to breathe. The solution, discovered in China by the 5th century CE, was to provide a firm horse collar fitting around the neck and shoulders of the animal to distribute the weight. These collars reached all the way to Europe by the 9th century CE. Enabling the horse to become the main draft animal of the region for plowing and transport. Saddles may have been invented in the 7th century BCE by nomadic horsemen around Assyria, making it much easier and more comfortable for them to ride their animals. And stirrups are light frames or rings that hold the foot of a rider attached to the saddle by a strap, likely invented in India prior to the 2nd century BCE. Most merchants traveled in caravans or in groups, and especially around Persia, they could often stay at roadside inns to rest and resupply. These places were known as caravanserai. These innovations were eventually brought to Europe by means of the Huns, but not until perhaps the 7th century CE. Nonetheless, the horse collar, saddle, and stirrup greatly improved farming as well as transportation and travel over land. The spread of agriculture, including rice and cotton from South Asia to the more arid Middle East, encouraged changes in farming and irrigation techniques, since they required more water than was readily available. Just as the Silk Road connected many Eurasian societies across land, the Sea Road, which consisted of scores of trading routes along the Indian Ocean basin, linked many societies in the Eastern Hemisphere across the waters. Transportation across water is cheaper because it requires less energy, and because ships can carry far more goods as opposed to beasts of burden, such as camels or donkeys. Trade along the sea road was very predictable due to the monsoons, which are heavy rains and wind currents that blow eastward during the summer months and westward during the winter months. Since the monsoon seasons were predictable, sometimes within a day or so, it lowered risk, which led to increased trade and profits. Many technological improvements in navigation equipment significantly accelerated interregional trade. The compass most likely originated in China around the 3rd century BCE, but did not make its way all the way to Europe until around the 12th century CE. This instrument was vital for navigation since it could determine a ship's direction relative to the Earth's magnetic poles at all times. However, due to the influence of Taoism, the Chinese initially used this device to align their buildings in an auspicious manner, guided by the principles of feng shui in order to create more positive energy. Another key navigational instrument was the astrolabe, which originated in the Greek city-states around 150 BCE. This device, improved by the Arabs, could accurately determine the latitude of a ship at sea by measuring the sun's noon altitude or the altitude of a star at night. Up until the 2nd century CE, most vessels primarily consisted of square sails that could only travel in the direction of the wind. That is until the triangular or lateen sail was innovated by the Persians or the Arabs. Another invention that greatly assisted travel was the Chinese sternpost rudder, originating around the 1st century CE and making its way into Europe centuries later. The sternpost rudder, along with the lateen sail, enabled the Chinese to invent junks. Apart from the name, they were large ocean-going vessels that were actually quite sturdy. They were able to tack or sail into the wind, greatly improving navigation and safety across the open seas. As technology diffused, people from other states and empires developed similar ships. While much of the transport along the sea road consisted of luxury goods, similar to the Silk Road, due to these efficient vessels, the transport of bulk goods such as rice, wheat, textiles, or timber was also highly lucrative. The sea road took centuries to form and grow, and true to other major trade routes, it was a conduit for the growth of other regions and the diffusion of ideas and religions. For instance, India, situated at the center of the Indian Ocean trade nexus, enabled its culture to spread across the region, with some historians referring to the Indianization of places such as Southeast Asia. Srivijaya was a Malay city-state on modern-day Indonesia that existed from around 650 to 1377 CE. It was ideally located between East and South Asia, capitalizing in trade that needed to pass through the choke point of the Strait of Malacca. Levying taxes and charging customs duties on transportation through their realm made them a powerful player along the Indian Ocean for centuries. Increased trade also enabled missionaries and merchants to spread their faith, including Hinduism, which made its way into some parts of Southeast Asia. The Champa and Khmer kingdoms were both well-rooted in Hinduism, and the largest Hindu temple in the world, Angkor Wat, in modern-day Cambodia, was constructed in the 12th century CE. Additionally, Buddhism spread through Southeast Asia. For instance, the world's largest Buddhist temple is found in the island of Java, part of modern-day Indonesia. But it was through the rise and massive diffusion of Islam, originating in Mecca, within Arabia, that signified the impact of the Sea Road and religious diffusion more than anything else during the post-classical era. Islam spread by means of contagious diffusion, affecting nearly everyone in the adjacent areas. It diffused throughout the Middle East, North Africa, and across the Sahara into the West. Islam also spread hierarchically into places like Indonesia, initially through merchants and missionaries, passing first to the most connected people or places. Islam diffused along East Africa by means of the Indian Ocean trade into the Swahili city-states, establishing a civilization that flourished between 1000 and 1500 CE. Cities such as Mombasa, Kilwa, Zanzibar, and others were somewhat similar to the Greek city-states, in that they all spoke Swahili, a Bantu language, and were dominated by the same religion, Islam, but they were politically independent. They were also commercial centers that traded goods from Africa's interior, such as gold, leopard skins, and even slaves, to other regions along the Indian Ocean, and vice versa, importing goods such as Chinese silk, Persian rugs, or Indian textiles. The Sahara Desert presented an environmental barrier, separating North Africa from sub-Saharan Africa. Some trade thrived along the Niger and Congo rivers. However, most commerce remained regional. That is, until more resilient breeds of Arabian camels were introduced around the 4th century CE. This remarkable animal that could last 10 days without water allowed for the formation of the Sand Road. It was a series of trans-Saharan trade routes that connected multiple regions economically and culturally. Caravans could consist of hundreds of people, thousands of camels, and take more than 2 months to cross in a single direction. The different ecological zones produce different goods, such as the savanna grasslands growing millet and sorghum, or the rainforest areas that produce yams and kola nuts. Even the Sahara Desert held deposits of copper and salt. Kingdoms such as Mali, Ghana, and Songhai developed along the key transport nodes along the Sand Road. These West African monarchies also became increasingly Islamic over time. They accumulated great wealth through the transactions of hundreds of types of goods, including slaves. Women were often sold off as domestic servants or concubines, whereas males, often taken from non-Islamic regions to the south, provided more manual labor. Between 1100 and 1400, perhaps more than 5,000 slaves a year were traded across the Sahara. The silk, sea, and sand roads increasingly connected people from multiple regions. These trade routes amplified the rate of commerce, the diffusion of culture, the exchange of ideas, and even the transmission of disease.
Well, la-di-frickin'